joining us this evening. Thank you for joining us this morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Early Childhood Education Assembly, Teaching by Leading with the Heart. The ECEA is an assembly within the National Council for Teachers of English. The ECEA believes that conversations about race and racism and teaching racial histories can and must happen with our youngest children if they are to grow into adults who will create more equitable tomorrows. We know that young children, they can talk about race. They are victims of racism and they absorb and learn and reappropriate it in many aspects of their lives without realizing it. We know that young children, they are our futures, they are our people. So we got to have these conversations. So once again, if you're just joining us, please tell us your name, where you are from, and what land you sit on. If you're not sure, there's a link that you can click in the chat and it will tell you. So before we begin and dive deeper into leading with the heart in these conversations, I would like to read our acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of this land and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous people and their traditional territories. So we would like to open our event by acknowledging that the land that I sit on, where I am, is the occupied, unceded, seized territory of the Wichita and Caddo affiliated tribes. These tribes have stewarded this land throughout the generations, and we would like to pay our respects to elders, both past and present. So if you are available, if you can, take a second and look through the chat and see where we have folks coming from. We have folks from on the Muskegee Creek land, the lands of Waxhaw and Sergi, all right? And we just want to take this time to acknowledge our Indigenous folks. So if you can, if you are a Twitter social media person, join the conversation on Twitter at ECEANCTE, all right? Hashtag ECEA webinar. So the agenda, it looks like this. The panelists, they're gonna present for about 10 minutes. We have 3 panelists, which you'll meet in a few moments. Then we're gonna have question and answer, and then you'll get to decide what breakout room you wanna go to further dive deeper into conversations with the panelists. And then finally, brief from our breakout room, all right? So we wanna unpack and soak up all this knowledge that we are about to dive into. So first up, we have Darius Phelps, and his presentation is about healing, advocacy, and liberation through diverse children's literature. Thank you, Darius, for being here with us today.
Hi guys, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate it. Yes, and so today I'm talking about diverse children's literature and how we can use that both in and outside the classroom to pretty much raise awareness and heal our students. This past year during the pandemic, I taught both 4th and 5th grade. And so I was really trying to figure out how can I really raise awareness considering what was going on at the time for my kids and really help them, not only, most importantly, see themselves through picture books. Next slide, please. So when I really started to really dive deep and try to really rewrite my curriculum, I want to really liberate my kids. And so this quote in particular stood out to me. Literacy Means Liberation by Septima Poinsetta Clark. And for me, that spoke volumes. I really want my kids to break free from the chains of what they've known, how they were raised, and really start to really see the world as expansive. Next slide. And so for me, I truly believe representation is everything. Children need to hear narratives that counter common negative stereotypes or missions about people based on some identity characteristics such as race, disability, gender, sexual orientation, and economic status. Liberation literature consciously and consistently reinforces these counter narratives. The use of liberation literature ensures that texts used in classrooms are mirrors for all children. Liberation literature and counter narratives, go back one slide, please, thank you, are important tools to help young children develop understanding about different social identities and groups of people. Multicultural literature has special effects for both teachers and students. With this, like you can see in the text I selected in this picture, minority students feel recognized and understood when their culture is acknowledged. And when I was in the classroom, these are three of my favorite ones that I used, especially this past May with AAPI Heritage Month. So with these texts and other texts I decided to use in the classroom, students from the mainstream culture learn that there are other perspectives and ways of doing things that are just as valuable as their own. Because in the classroom, students need to hear, appreciate, and understand new and different perspectives. And to be, liberation literature brings these various perspectives to the center of the classroom curriculum and discussion so that the students can develop the language necessary to talk about their identity as well as the diversity around them. Our society is becoming increasingly diverse, and it's more important now more than ever to learn all that we can to truly create a welcoming classroom atmosphere within our classrooms and beyond. Next slide. So books teach life skills, and with this picture you can see I had a very diverse group of fourth graders at the time. Coming in, they had no idea about the world outside their own. They also really hated reading, period. So this is where picture books came in, where I was using it to really foster not only their creativity, their imagination, but also in tie again social emotional learning and creating that empathy that we can use with picture books. So when it comes to true multicultural education, I feel that that is one thing that's constantly growing and evolving as we tackle the rising issues that we face in the world. So the goal is to teach for equity, and that alone isn't easy because there are many different biases and an overall lack of diversity in the education field. But it's truly necessary in the classroom to make sure that our future leaders of America are ready to face this outside world. So with using these books, I taught my kids that reading literature about people from other cultures has been proven to have positive developmental effects. And with it, they began to foster the understanding of different cultures, perspectives, backgrounds, and ultimately develop diversity, social emotional learning, equity, confidence, love for people of other cultures, empathy, emotions. And one beautiful thing too that came along with it was I was able to enhance their writing skills when combined with appropriate prompts that tie into these books. And most importantly, they learned the importance of self-reflection. These help these kids gain a better understanding of people from other countries and other ethnic backgrounds. And these stories, like you saw before, by wonderful artists such as Min Lei and Joanna Ho, these help these kids gain a better understanding and of people who live in different parts of the world, and also how children are portrayed from different cultures and backgrounds live together in different countries. These works can either be fiction, nonfiction, folk tales, fairy tales, legends, or poetry. But above all, they must be accurate and portray characters in positive, non-stereotypical ways. Next slide. In order to practice what we preach, we have to help our students see the world through different lenses and do all we can to expose them to diverse texts. Reading multicultural literature can help these kids gain this better understanding. And so, having taught middle grades for the last 2 years, I normally start off with picture books in my classroom so my students can make visual connection. The beauty of picture books is that they are universal and can apply to any classroom setting. So as you can see here, this helps foster understanding of identity, who to associate with, who is different in their eyes, and also appealing and connecting to the community and being more empathetic and understanding. Next slide. So some takeaways are, through literature from diverse cultures such as the ones mentioned, teachers can address issues of gender equality, freedom, love, bullying, which I'll go into more in my breakout session, leadership, courage, and confidence. Diverse literature teaches us to embrace our authentic selves, including our flaws. By tackling this pedagogical approach, teachers are allowed to better educate their students, empower the communities, dismantle supremacy, recognize their own biases, and create a chapter as together we are invincible, and ultimately create a safe haven within the pages of literature for their kids. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Darius, for sharing what you're using in your classroom. You know, multicultural, equity-driven books are, you know, one way for students to see themselves. So thank you. And Darius will be one of the breakout rooms. Next up, we have Chris, Community Activism as Curriculum. Thank you for being here today with us, Chris.
Thank you. So I want to build on what Darius talked about. Darius was really rooting a lot of his work that he shared in Latson Billings culturally relevant pedagogy. He has expectations of academic success and excellence from his kids. He's especially looking and digging deeply into cultural competence, where he's using representation within literature to make sure what the kids are learning is reflecting their home lives and the cultures and the cultural knowledge that they bring with them to the classroom. And by introducing some of those books, which are issue-based books, it gives them an opportunity to start developing some critical consciousness. That's where I'm going to root my talk tonight, in that last aspect, the critical consciousness, that as we go through all these other parts of what we know is important for our kids, ultimately to create more just communities, we have to help our kids learn how to become advocates around the issues that are especially important to them. Can you go to the next slide? And click it one more time. Thank you. So when we think about social justice teaching in the classroom, I think Teaching Tolerance does a really good job of framing what that is so that we have an idea of what we're trying to accomplish. The first aspect being that we're trying to help our children celebrate their social identities and who they are and all they bring to our classroom community and our broader communities, our nation, and our world. The second aspect of that is helping them develop a better understanding and appreciation for the diversity that is our country and how important it is to who we are. Third aspect of social justice teaching is the actual justice. It's learning to become critically aware of those things that are happening around us, to start questioning them, to start critiquing them, and to start hopefully moving into this last stage, activism, thinking, what can we do about this? How can I address this? How can I address this in my own life first and think about what role I might be playing in this? And then how can I help others to address it and go larger scale from there? You go to the next slide. So my kids in my classroom, I teach second and third grade in South Carolina, and we invest ourselves in activism quite often. We've been to city council, we've had kids at state senate pulling legislators out to lobby them, kids showing up at the school board to advocate to our superintendent and our school board on many different levels. So to give an example of what community activism as a vehicle for our learning might look, I'm going to focus on just one of these tonight to show you how it evolves in our classroom and which direction we took it. Slide. So it all started with a news article. A couple of my girls came into a morning meeting one day, and in a morning meeting, that's where we ask a lot of our critical questions. That's where kids bring in news articles to talk, and really morning meeting for us is a time just to explore ideas together and me to ask the kids, what do you want to talk about? Which obviously takes some building into. They don't do that from day one, but scaffolding them into the work. So a couple of girls came in with this article from our local paper. It was Columbia City of Women pushes for representation of women on landmarks. And what we found out in this news article was that in our city, there are, I think, like 140 something street signs that are named after people, and only one of them is named after a woman. And that is Lady Street, which is named after Martha Washington. So they talked about it and they shared it. And I followed up with, so how do you think this comes to happen? You know, how do we live in a city with so many street signs named after men and just one named after women? And after we talked about that a little bit more, I said, so who's interested in trying to do something about this? And I'll be honest, I had no idea what we might do about this, but I knew we could figure it out together. And that's exactly what we did. So if you go to the next slide. So I found this quote from Joe Long. He's the curator of education, the South Carolina Confederate Relic Room and Military Museum. And the quote reads, "The landmarks that we can see, roads, buildings, parks, and so forth, have often been named for those whose legacies still shape us." So when we think of all these street signs in our city that are named after men, we have to consider it's their legacy who's shaping us. So who are these men? You go to the next slide. So these are the names of streets around our city: Hugie Street, Pickens, Marion, Hardin, Gatson, Bull, Barnwell, and Sumter. And if you live in South Carolina, you're likely familiar with many of these names. And if you don't live in South Carolina, I can help to fill you in a little bit. They're, first of all men, as we discussed, wealthy men, almost all men who were in the military, and mostly men who owned slaves, so enslaved people. So when we think back to that last quote about the legacies that shape us, sadly, those are the legacies that shape us in South Carolina, but that's something that we need to change. So to invest in this work, my students, you can go to the next slide. Because I had my kids for 2 years, which is absolutely wonderful. We started this in 2nd grade and we stayed with it all the way into 3rd grade. We wound up about 15 months working on this study. So one of the first things we did is we just invited the journalist who wrote that article into our classroom to tell us a little bit about her research notes and how she came to this article and what she learned and what didn't make it to the article. She helped connect us with local organizations who were taking up this work also, and people that we could talk to better understand the issue from a variety of different perspectives. From there, I invited everyone I could think of into our classroom to help us think about who are the women who are not in our history books, who are the women who are not on our street signs. One thing we'd already noticed, because in 3rd grade in South Carolina, that's when the kids really jump into historical studies. When we looked through our history text that was provided to us, we noticed that women were always on the sidebar, or they were always on the last page or two of the chapter. So they were kind of an add-on. They weren't history itself. It was, well, in relation to the important stuff, oh yeah, here's a couple of things that women had done. So we knew there were important stories and we had to go out and find them. So we had parents come in, teachers, administrators, school board members, people from the local community, again, anybody at all who I could drag into our classroom. And had this happened this year with COVID, I would have known how easy it was to just get people in through Google Meet and things like that. But this is when people still physically came to your classroom. So they came and they told us about all these women who was really important to them. It could be people from their family. It could be people from our very local community, our state, our country, our nation. In the end, I think we wound up with about 25, 27 names. This is just our first list. You can see Sojourner Truth, Malala is on there, Nellie Bly. So lots of really important women. You can go into the next, go ahead and go to the next slide. So after we had studied this, I mentioned for like 15 months, and we talked to the journalists and we talked to all sorts of different people, we came up with a plan for what it is we wanted. Once we knew whose histories were being omitted and why they should have been included, once we looked at the history text to see how they were portraying women or weren't even portraying women at all, as we found out more about the city street signs and what was going on, we felt that we were prepared to do something with this information. So we invited the mayor of Columbia into our classroom, Mayor Steve Benjamin, and he came in. And before he came in, I talked a lot with the kids about, we do not want to be patted on the head. We don't want to be told that we're cute. We don't want to be told that we did a good job, because that's not what we're here for. We are not here to do a good job. We're not here to be performative and have other people say, hey, you're doing the work. We're here for people to listen to us. We're here for people to understand that we have an expectation of you to do something with the information that we just gave you, because you are in a position of power. And to his credit, he invited us to City Hall for ice cream, but he also invited us to City Hall to give a formal presentation to City Council to make a call on them to do this work. So if you could go ahead and cue up the video. I have a short video that illustrates a little bit and shows the kids in action as they were at City Hall that day.
Are taking matters into their own hands. 3rd graders from Richland 2's Center for Inquiry have some issues with street names in Columbia, and they took those concerns to this week's City Council meeting.
It was a big moment for those 3rd graders here at City Hall when they took to the podium to express their concerns.
She treated both white and black patients and was in great demand. That means people really liked her. Dr. Evans was elected president of the Palmetto State Medical Society,
hoping to educate and inspire others with the history of prominent women. It was an out-of-the-ordinary council meeting this week filled with elementary students looking to make change.
This presentation is so important. Thank you all for being here this evening.
If you look at the streets of Columbia, there is one thing in common. Almost all streets named after people are named after men. So there were some things these young women needed to share.
There only being one street name named after a woman, Lady Street, which is after Martha Washington, and we just thought that needed to change. It's exciting, and I really want to be a role model.
And stepping up, no doubt, these young leaders definitely are.
No matter their color or gender, we should do better.
And it appears they got the mayor's attention.
Our hope is that you will consider this when naming new streets or creating new landmarks.
I think we'll have some pretty cool announcements really soon. Really soon.
Council members and
so there was one other press piece that the kids got an opportunity to do also. And one of the girls who spoke that night spoke on that one. And she ends with this comment. She said, "This just needs a change, and I'm going to be the one to change it." And I love that statement. I'm going to be the one to change it. All these things that we're learning in our classroom should not be for the benefit of a test at the beginning of the year. All these things that we learn in our classroom should not be the benefit of our own career opportunities, although that's an important aspect. The things that we're learning in our classroom should be in service of our communities. Things that we're learning in our classroom should be better preparing our kids to go out and fight for what's right and make our communities more just places. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So when I think about a framework for supporting student action, I think the first thing we have to help our students with is to find that sense of agency that resides inside them that maybe they haven't discovered yet. Our kids have to believe that they can make a real difference. And to be honest, almost every adult I know needs to learn that same lesson, that we all have the power within us to make a difference if we only reach out and make that effort. Or we find people who are already making these efforts and we say, how can I help with this? Because in doing that, we learn the skills of advocacy also. So the next aspect is helping our kids develop the knowledge that they need to become advocates, because we don't want anybody running blindly towards some perceived threat. We can do more harm than we can do good when we go and take action and we don't understand what we're doing. The other aspect of that is people are not going to take us seriously. And I mentioned again, we spent more than a year studying this so that by the time we got there, the reason we were invited to City Hall is because when they spoke to the mayor, they were very well versed. They knew exactly what it was they were talking about. And then the last aspect that we need to help kids with is to develop the skills of advocacy. And those are all the things that we're learning in our classroom. Those are our communication skills. Those are our writing skills, our research and reading skills, all those sorts of things. So that when we bring all of this together, the reason we're learning all those things throughout our day, it's right here, right? It's so that we can do this work, which is so important. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So we had a happy ending for this one. They announced a new street name, and all the kids were invited there. And Matilda Evans was actually the one that we had advocated for. I think we gave 3 suggestions. So the lady in the brown top and kind of the maroonish, I guess, skirt right beside the sign, that's one of her descendants, which was really exciting for us to get to meet her and do that. And the thing I love about this group of kids is if that wouldn't have been the outcome, they'd have been willing to show up for public participation, whether they were welcomed or not, invited or not, to say, hey, we were here before. And we did discuss in our classroom that this is a little bit of tokenism because now we have 2 street signs named after women. And that's not our ultimate goal, but it's a first step and we can keep working from there. You going to go to the next slide. So we keep doing this work. I mentioned earlier that some people have been to the State House. One of my boys, he wrote to every state senator in our state about a really harmful bill S-419 that was going through the Senate. His mom's an educator, so he's been talking a lot about that with her and with me in the classroom because I talk about my advocacy work with my kids often also. And he wrote letters to all of them. He showed up on the Senate floor. He pulled them out and he lobbied them. He had it read on the Senate floor, to which one of the politicians who were up there wanted to argue against him and said, why would we listen to him? He probably just got all this information from his parent who's an educator. Yeah, that's where you get information about education from. That's where you find out what classrooms need from the educators. Leah, the picture I showed earlier, she had been at the school board. She was upset. Her mom's a school librarian, and she wanted to come speak to them about the fact that our libraries are underfunded and that our collections in our libraries are not representative, as Darius just mentioned, of the student populations that they're serving. So she went to demand more money for our school libraries. And then this year, our project has been in learning about government, learning about a specific bill that Representative Wendy Brawley pre-filed. It was a pay equity bill. so that women, people of color, and all the groups of people with disabilities, everyone has the right to be paid fairly based on what other people within the field at a certain level get. So we spoke with Representative Brawley, we spoke with people who didn't like this bill at all, we spoke with anybody who would come in. And then that picture right there is Representative Ivory Thigpen. He's our representative. He came in virtually to our classroom so the kids could directly lobby him for what they wanted in terms of this bill. Go ahead and go to the last slide. So today, our superintendent of schools here in South Carolina put out a public comment statement about critical race theory and how it will never, ever show up in South Carolina schools. There will be no funding, no opportunities for people to take on any of this type of work. I'm gonna read you one sentence from hers real quick. It said, instead of this, we will focus on South Carolina and our nation's storied history, and we will teach the truth, the good and the bad, to our students. So in her estimation, issues of racism, issues of inequity, those are historical studies, but those aren't for the present. There's a problem for her and many people in our state when it's in the present. That's why we need to teach our kids to advocate. That's why we need adults to learn to advocate, because when we aren't willing to push and to advocate for these sorts of things, we don't see the changes that we want. Thank you very much.
Yes, Chris, thank you so much for sharing what's going on in your classroom. Advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. And as we're in Pride Month, and like the third grader said, look, no matter the color or gender, how they identify pronouns, we should do better. And we can do better. All right. So thank you so much, Chris. Chris is the second breakout room if you want to dive deeper with Chris. And next, we have Sovindara. All right. Are you down with IPP? How do we pair inclusive pedagogical practices with loving actions? So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you. So again, my name is Sobandara Chin, and I use the pronouns she, her, hers. I identify as Cambodian American. So I'll be presenting about how we pair inclusive pedagogical practices with loving action. I will be focusing more on the work of the teacher. So you down with IPP? If you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you know the song. So during this presentation, I will weave the strand of loving action and how it is a vehicle to transform education by pairing it with inclusive pedagogical practices. So for some of you, inclusive is synonymous with special education. Here, I'm using the term to reference the acceptance, acknowledgement, accommodations provided in a classroom environment that supports students to thrive to their fullest potential. That includes not only ability and neurodiversity of students, but also their other multiple and intersecting identities such as race, ethnicity, religion, gender, socioeconomic status, citizenship, and age. So why IPP? Because as research continues to show, pairing loving action with inclusive pedagogical practices will increase student academic achievement and student affective outcomes, such as their motivation and engagement and ownership. This pairing is shifting the paradigm from teacher-centered, teacher-driven to a more learner-centered and learner-driven approach. Next slide, please. So we will take a holistic approach to pairing IPP with loving action by using a health and safety lens. This is especially important during this pandemic, as the most affected racial group are our BIPOC folks. So with the safety lens, we are centering the experiences of our BIPOC students to make sure they are emotionally, mentally, and physically safe. What that means is, are they able to safely walk into a space, walk into the classroom and bring all of their identities without having to code switch or feel ashamed or feel less than or feel devalued? With the health lens, are there opportunities for your students, again, centering BIPOC students and other historically marginalized students at the center? Are there opportunities for them to learn, to grow and sustain their mental, emotional, and physical health? At the center of this holistic approach to health and safety is self-love. So when you center self-love in this holistic approach, you will allow yourself to liberate and heal. Self-love, not in a narcissistic, conceited way, but in a way that is deep and has an overall acceptance and appreciation for who you and your students are as a whole. So it involves both action and feeling. So here are the, so how are you providing mental health and safety? Do you provide opportunities for students to have a growth mindset, participate in mindfulness activities, have access to mental wellness, such as a counselor or a therapist? Are you providing physical health and safety? Do you provide opportunities for students to have body positivity, encourage them to have movement within the class, and discuss and model nutrition and life skills such as hand washing? Are you providing emotional health and safety? Do you provide students a brave space to discuss their feelings, characters, and identities? Again, do the work of self-love with yourself first, and then with your students. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of self-love work with my kinders. Know your students. We talked about family diversity. We talked about customs, traditions, and culture of our families. We compared and contrasted each other's families. Next slide, please. And here is a student work sample. So know your students, families, and know your classroom community. They are all valuable assets to the classroom. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here are I Am poems written by 5th graders, provided by my amazing colleague, Julia. The reason why I'm showing you this is because my kinders also write I Am poems. And looping this activity back again in 5th grade from kinder is so amazing to see their growth in self-love and how it develops. Next slide, please. And here, and click again, please. And here are other examples of 5th grade work, again, provided by my colleague. The sophistication and thoughtfulness that these kids put in these identity statements in a poem, and these poems are amazing. Next slide. So, we cannot lead with love if we do not disrupt unloving systems. So to paraphrase the work of Dina Simmons on describing the intersection of SEL and ABAR, we are not doing social emotional learning if we are not doing anti-bias and anti-racist work. Click again, please. So we need to do all of this. We need to make sure our classroom fosters a welcoming, loving, belonging environment, as this is the biggest indicator of student success, academic achievement, and student motivation. And when students feel like they do not belong or feel unloved, or if they don't feel welcome, particularly those from historically marginalized groups, this exclusion can negatively impact student success. Again, going back to the holistic approach to health and safety. So familiarize yourself with these 3 approaches and standards. CASEL, which is collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning. They have 5 core competencies that develop skills in self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. And the anti-bias social justice standards, which Chris had mentioned, they are goals for creating an inclusive learning environment that focus on identity, diversity, justice, and action. And please, please read the blog post by NCTE. There's a great blog post called Being an Anti-Racist Educator is a Verb. And in there, it talks about the different ways that you can modify your curriculum to confront and challenge racism. So using current events, texts, and project-based learning. So next slide, please. Tina Turner. So what's love got to do with IPP? We got to examine, so before we go into IPP, we have to examine the power relationships operate in the classrooms that enables teachers to make sense of the ways of practice that can contribute to unequal opportunities for students. So sometimes we do things unintentionally, but it's through this through this reflective action, we are using a holistic approach. So if you are centering self-love, then you are doing reflective action. Reflective action means you are reflecting on, constructing, and interrogating new knowledge within the context of existing knowledge and building on from experiencing, and to be actively engaged in developing your practice, especially when mistakes are made. So again, through this act of self-love, by holistically reflecting, you're using a critical lens to examine existing knowledge, values, and beliefs about education, and in particular, early childhood education, and how we use loving action to transform our approach to teaching and learning. Next slide, please. So a way to interrupt racism, bias, prejudice, and hate is to pair inclusive pedagogical practices with loving action. That means that you're recognizing that there are multiple levels of power and privilege that can play within your classroom and school. Yes, including in pre-K classrooms and kindergarten classrooms, there's power and privilege that is in play there. Okay, next slide, please. So pairing inclusive pedagogical, go back, yeah, there we go. Pairing inclusive pedagogical practices with loving action means that you're creating a learning environment that is learner-centered and learner-directed. That means you are supporting and guiding your students. That means you're providing meaningful and purposeful and accessible learning for all your students. So this is how you disrupt and interrupt racism and bias and prejudice and hate. Next slide, please. So pairing IPP with loving action means you are valuing and leveraging all your students' multiple identities as strengths, that you are using a strengths-based approach and not a deficit approach, that the students have so much background knowledge and life experiences that they can bring value added into the curriculums. And again, this is how you disrupt and interrupt racism, bias, and prejudice and hate. In this student work sample, the student wrote an I Am poem over the span of 2 weeks. This is a kindergartner, and it's based off the book, the photo book, The Best Part of Me. Students pick out their favorite body part and wrote about it, and I provided sentence stems for them. Next slide, please. And this is how you teach, by leading with the heart, having students tell their stories, sharing their stories with others, and valuing each other's stories, and emphasizing with other students who may be different than you. So here is another example of an I Am poem from another kindergartner. Next slide, please. So this is how you develop community activism. So we did this unit of inquiry right before the pandemic hit. So we learned about the UN development goals, and we learned about the Black Lives Matter principles. And then the students decided that they want to go a little bit deeper on one of the UN development goals, which was no hunger. So then what we did was we connected with a food bank and find out ways that, and get ideas from them on different ways that we can support the food bank and learn more about how the food bank serves the community. Next slide, please. And this is how you liberate and heal. This is a reflection from a 5th grader. Imagine what kind of change makers and disruptors we have if we start in the earlier years. Having them practice self-love and reflecting on what is and can be, making sure that children see themselves in the curriculum and in the greater world is pretty amazing. So again, this is why we're starting early. This is why we're starting with the early years, so 3, 4, 5-year-olds, because we want them to be disruptors by the time they're in 5th grade. I mean, they could be disruptors now. My 3-year-old daughter is a disruptor. So next slide, please. Self-love is a deep and overall acceptance and appreciation of who you are and who your students are as a whole. It involves both action and feeling. Implementing inclusive pedagogical practices means that you are utilizing the triumvirate: social emotional learning, anti-bias, and anti-racism. Remember to do your work within yourself first. Love yourself and love your students. Thank you.
Yes, Sylvander, thank you so much for sharing, what is taking place in your educational spaces. All right, humanizing the classroom and pedagogy, this abolitionist, anti-racist work is possible. All right, and the babies know the way, okay? The kids know the way. So if the kids know who they are, us as educators, we gotta know who we are. You gotta do that work to unpack your biases, all right? So that we can all be abolitionists, anti-racist. All right, so Sylvander is gonna be the 3rd breakout room. You can go and share and, learn even more from her. So now this is where we have the opportunity to have conversations, more in-depth conversations with our panelists. So room number 1 is Darius, diverse children's literature to liberate and raise awareness. Room 2 is Chris, curriculum and instruction that directly addresses any inequity. And room 3 is Sovindara, pairing inclusive pedagogical practices with loving actions. So this is a self-select option. What I want you to do now, we're gonna practice. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you're gonna see breakout room, join breakout room. It may be different for you. Do you see it? Okay, click on it. Do you see the 3 rooms? Click the room you wanna go to. If you need help, let us know in the chat and we'll get you to where you need to be. Tracy, do you see the bottom of the screen? I mean, the bottom of your Zoom application? Do you see anything that says join breakout rooms or anything about breakout rooms? Can you share a little bit?
Let me
What do
see
you
if I
see?
can we put
Okay.
her, maybe we can put her in there, Sandra?
Yes, if she tells us what room she'd like to be
Yeah,
in.
Tracy, let us know.
Yes.
So if you've lost that, then just let us know what room you'd like to be in and we can put you there.
So Tracy, what room would you like to be in? Grace wants to be in room 3.
Okay. Then we've got Mary Jade. Tracy, I don't know if something's appeared for you to join the room, because we did put you in room 3. You should have, something should have popped up to tell you, to ask you if you wanted to go there.
Mary Jade wants to be in room 2.
In room 2? Hopefully Tracy.
Hey, Tracy. Oh. Tracy, do you see the room yet?
Okay, I think everybody should be back.
Okay. All right, welcome back everyone from your breakout room sessions. We want to move into a question and answer, or just a free flowing conversation to unpack what you talked about. So for example, if you were in Chris's breakout room, but you wanted to hear what Darius had to say, this is a time that you can ask Darius a question. You can type it in the chat, or you can come mute and ask your question, share your knowledge, however you feel best works for you. And this is even for the presenters, you know, if Sylvan Dower got a question for Chris, ask it. We here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jose Jimenez. I'm in New York. I just want to say I loved hearing such impassioned teaching and learning about your different projects that you're doing with students in our school. I'm the principal of the school, and we're on similar journeys of trying to find how to be more culturally responsive and sustaining, having a more LGBTQ inclusive curriculum from pre-K through 5th grade, and just really showing kids there are different ways of being in this world, and I could sense that that advocacy work that I saw, or even just increasing the representation and emphasis on being different and that being okay in the literature, or the writing that I witnessed was amazing. So just really liked what you guys presented and wanted to share that.
Thank you, Jose, for sharing. Thank you for letting the presenters know. And do one of the presenters want to speak up, share anything? So, because
I'll
I
speak
can
a
go
little
all day. Okay, go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Yeah, I was just speaking a little bit to the discussion that we had in our breakout room, and a question that often gets asked, and I think it's an important question because I think it keeps a lot of people from doing the work that's important, is what is the response that we get from administrators? What is the response that we get from parents, and how do we navigate those sorts of things? And I always wish that there was an easier answer to that, but I think ultimately we have to be willing to have the courage to do work that we know is important and say, ultimately, I can protect a number of different people in the decision that I make. Am I protecting the right ones? Am I protecting the ones that maybe are the most vulnerable, ones who are most in need of the work that we're doing right now? And it's that good trouble. Like sometimes we have to be willing to get in a little bit of good trouble, but it's not as simple as that, because some of us do work in places where people might fear for their employment status, right? I think another important part, and Mary Jade brought this up, is being able to very clearly and passionately and from an informed perspective articulate what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, and how it benefits our kids. And anytime I didn't talk about this with you all because I think we're a little more of a home crowd, but whenever I speak with other people about this work, I always bring this back to, we're still teaching all the same things that you're expected to teach. All those standards that you're trying to uncover, we're trying to uncover them through work that's more authentic, that's more genuine, that's more generative, because we're not asking anyone to add another thing to their plate. We're saying you can do the same things you're already doing, but you can do them to accomplish something that's really, really important. And when we can communicate that to our parents and to our administrators, keep them informed and let them know how it's going, more often than not, we get a lot more support than we think we're going to get.
Yes, Chris, exactly. You know, a lot of pre-service teachers are, educators in general, you shared, how do we get this past admin? But also, like, Sylvan Dara shared, where do you draw the line? When do you humanize the classroom? When do you humanize these students? All right. Anyone else?
We've got somebody in the chat box.
So Katie shared, in your book, Chris, you talk about creating safe spaces for whom? We must be brave to ensure that all students are centered and work to deconstruct and disrupt oppressive practices.
So she's referring to this idea that classrooms need to be safe spaces, and the question we should always ask is safe spaces for whom? And that should be an answer that we answer very carefully, right? Which kind of speaks to exactly what I was mentioning. Thank you, Katie.
Darius or Sylvan Dara, do you want to share how you build safe spaces inclusive classrooms?
For me, and then one thing especially as being an African American male, which is a rarity in the field of education, is I always teach my kids first and foremost by modeling is just being vulnerable to create that safe space. You really want to have them walk into your classroom and feel like I'm at home, because for so many kids, the classroom is the only home or safe space they may know. I mean, they may be going through hell outside of the four walls of our classroom. So I always try to foster that relationship and build that rapport with my kids and letting them know I'm here for you. I truly love you like you're my own flesh and blood. And what happens in this classroom stays in this classroom, and with me, you're safe. So I always try to reiterate that through my work and the type of picture books I use, as well as to show them that, you know, you may come from this background, but it's okay, and learn to appreciate who you are and build things like self-confidence, love, empathy, and all that we covered through the presentation. But that's how I truly leave in my heart, is really just wearing my heart on my sleeve for my kids.
Yeah, so I guess like I've been trying to not force myself, but change my verbiage from using safe space to a brave space with my students, especially centering our BIPOC students. So some ways that I do this in the classroom is, you know, I think about my classroom culture. What am I allowing or not allowing in my classroom? So our classroom contract, our morning meetings, writing about our hopes and dreams, our ground rules, guidelines for our having tricky and difficult conversations, strategies to resolve conflict, and of course, like Darius said, modeling. So I also tell parents that I have one job, and that is to keep the students safe and make sure that they are loved. So there's actually 2 bullet points, but they're still number 1 points. So that is my number 1 job with my students. So one question that was brought up in my breakout room was like, you know, how do you have these conversations with parents who said that, you know what, you know, that is not, like, you know, my family's values, that is not my 3-year-old. You can say hi. Sorry. So I also tell the parents, you know, like, I'm doing this because I want to make sure that the kids feel safe to come to me and talk about their curiosity, to talk about their wonderings, to feel safe, to feel safe and to have this trust with me that they are confiding these wonderings that they have. So yeah, I guess like going back to like, again, that reflective action piece, you know, what am I doing in my classroom, and to create that that safe and brave space for my students.
Exactly. So Vandara, look, we're all family here, okay? I got a 2-year-old that do the same thing. That's all this past year Zoom has been. But you know, thank you, Katie, 1, for your question statement. And 2, you know, kids are not going to learn from you, especially elementary kids, if they don't feel that you care. If you don't build that authentic relationship, they're not going to learn nothing. So
Hi, this is Mary Jade. I wanted to say that you know, creating a space for children, or a brave space, which is so eloquently said, is belonging. When children know that they belong to a space, when they walk in your room, you know, it's so important, because they feel loved. And that is my goal for a lot of teachers that I work with, and trying to get them to understand that, you know, the selection of literature that you have displayed in your classroom the minute children walk in on day 1 is, and you know, you build on that as you get to know your children, as you get to know your students. That's how you should be making your selection in curating your libraries, the books that you have around your classroom, your selection for your read alouds. And right now I'm currently the librarian at my school, and that's what my goal is, to make sure that there's access for all children to belong. and through books, through literature. And so I appreciate Darius, I appreciate, listening to your presentation. I've been a coach, I've been a classroom teacher, I've been an art teacher, I've been a teacher educator. I have done a lot of work in a lot of areas in education. And one of my favorite parts of being an educator is the summer camp that we create, and having those children walk in there and see all the books, and they see themselves, and how it doesn't take that long for them to just belong and become friends, and to really take on voices that people can't even fathom, that these kids can get all of this happening in 8 days, because we only do an 8-day camp, but that's all it is. And so I do want to say this before I sign off. I thank each and every one of you for the work that you're doing and your presentations. And every time I'm just re-empowered right now to just go back and continue to do the work that we're all charged to do. So y'all keep moving forward, because it is a challenge. And sometimes they want us to be quiet, but we can't. It's important. They don't want us to have a voice as professionals. And when I say they, you can figure out who they may be within your context. But you have to know that the work that we have to do balances the universe, because right now we're out of balance. If you pay attention, we're out of balance. And if you see, I know, like, if you walk in your building, you can see that your building is out of balance. I know, like in my building right now, I can see that we're out of balance. And the only way they're going to listen is that you do the work and make sure that we are knowledgeable. And that's why it's important for us to come together and have these conversations. So thank you.
Yes, Mary J. Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead, Darius.
No, I was just going to say thank you for your kind words that we truly appreciate it on behalf of the Assembly. And thank you for what you do as a media specialist / librarian, because it's like we really don't show love and appreciate you guys enough. You guys truly are what I used to like to call the nucleus of the school building. And, you're a wealth of resources for the teachers, especially me coming from an ELA background. I know I still work hand in hand with my old media specialist. So thank you for all you do. We really, truly appreciate you. So thank you for being an advocate for this as well.
Definitely. And Mary J., you said a lot. Belonging and access. It's that basic, belonging and access. Are there any other questions, comments? I mean, we are a community that learns and shares together. And you are not alone in this journey. I know this past year more than a year, has been isolating, but you're definitely not alone. So from the ECEA, we want to take this time and say thank you so much for being here with us for our first webinar, Teaching Through the Heart. If you are not a member and you want to join the ECA, join our awesome assembly, go to this website and or click on the link in the chat and learn about us, all right? Some benefits are up-to-date policy information, invitation to events and meetings, access to an online journal, and conference travel scholarships and educator awards. This is a space to highlight, celebrate, encourage educators. All right, it's all about us. So if you want to learn, if you want to join, click on the link in the chat, or follow ECEA on social media for what we have coming up, what we have going on. Facebook is Early Childhood Education Assembly, Twitter, ECEA NCTE. And if all hearts and minds are clear, and if we are fired up to continue this abolitionist advocacy, anti-racist, all right, multicultural, equity-driven, diverse, pedagogical, I can keep going, space, go ahead and go. But thank you for being here. And, make sure to interact with us. And we appreciate you so much for being here.